It is not every day you happen to watch a documentary and see your YouTube channel all over the place. So I wanted to take a moment the day after and invite one of my best friends on the show. He was in the documentary, and we're going to give our thoughts on everything. We've got a lot of cool, important things that we want to share with people that might be finding their way here to this channel after having watched the documentary. So let's get into that.
From Dallas, Texas, this is Anarchast.
Greetings, anarchists. Welcome back to your home for anarchy on the internet. Today we have a special guest. Welcome back to the show, Larken. It's good to talk to you again. You are a very, very busy man these days, so I appreciate you giving us the benefit of your time.
No problem. Excellent to be on again.
So, you knew that the documentary was happening, I think, obviously, because I think you were interviewed for it, right? Can you kind of tell us about how it got started and how you got involved and kind of the beginnings?
Yeah, well, this thing was made by friends of ours. I guess when they started, we didn't even know them yet. Kim and Todd, who made this thing over, I guess, 5 or 6 years of going to Acapulco and learning about the movement and all that, and along the way became friends of ours, of Amanda and myself. And so at various events, we did little interviews, and we were interviewed down there. And then, I don't remember how many months ago, less than a year ago, another major with them over in California for this thing. We didn't know, because they weren't allowed to tell people. We didn't know what it was going to air on. We didn't know how big it was going to be. You know, they had been working on it for years, writing it and together and all that. So we didn't know it was going to be on HBO until very shortly before it actually happened. So it was just, as far as we know, it was a couple of friends of our documentary that they were all excited about, and we thought, oh, cool. And so we did interviews with that, and it's really weird to see it. And like, we personally know almost everybody in the first episode anyway. And so it's really weird and cool to see, not only to see them out there, but see them able to, and us, able to explain and express what we believe in our own words, instead of getting like the mangled, mutilated version that the media always does whenever they talk about anything that doesn't fit their agenda.
It was so surreal watching something on HBO Max with like my friends and other people that I know personally and have hung out with, and it very, very surreal. A lot of people expected, rightfully so, that a documentary coming out of HBO or any of these mainstream media companies would have basically been a hit piece. And adding to that, I think I'm speaking without firsthand knowledge. This is secondhand knowledge, and I don't know if you can confirm or deny any of it. But and we are going to hopefully have the creators of the documentary on the Anarchast, hopefully soon. We might wait until after the whole documentary has aired. We'll see how that goes. But I believe their contracts sort of specified that they had complete creative freedom. They could do whatever they want. They couldn't be ordered to cut things out or to edit it in a certain way. And also that HBO had control over the teasers and the trailers and some of the advertising around it. So a lot of the things that all is to say that a lot of the media that's out there in terms of like the reviews and the news media about it are negative. Well, number one, all these media companies, of course it's going to be negative. And they're going to paint it in the worst possible light possible. Like one of the stories I saw said that Lily's boyfriend, the one that got murdered, forced her to come to Mexico. It's absolutely false. So like there's a lot of bad media about it. And the trailers that HBO made certainly kind of paint a certain picture, but the actual content itself is much better than all that. And I think a lot of people are prejudging the documentary based on what we would normally expect out of these companies, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I know lots of people who expected to get totally butchered and mischaracterized, like the media absolutely always does with us. And I had to keep telling them, we know the people who made this, like they're friends of ours. This isn't going to be the normal hatchet job. And the thing is, like a trailer, the job of a trailer is to get people's attention and interest. And so they're always sensational and they're always like teasing and don't really tell you the whole story. And then the job of filmmakers is storytellers. They need to tell a story that includes the drama and the scary stuff and the happy stuff, and because it's not just a lecture on philosophy like you and I might do.
If it was, it would have never gotten bought and aired on HBO.
Right.
Like they needed a story.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's easy for some people to say, well, like I don't like how this makes us look or something, or I don't particularly like that person as our spokesman. Well, people are people. Like in any organization, there's going to be differences of opinion of how to do things. People, some people get along, some people don't. Some people are friends, some people aren't. So the fact that the story doesn't paint us all as like, robots marching in line, we all agree on absolutely everything. That's because we're still just people. And then on top of that, you have the mainstream media, which is basically just propagandists for the ruling class. Yeah. And I actually analogy because somebody said, well, I haven't seen the thing yet, but I've seen some articles and they look really bad. And what do you expect? And I said, look, if you could rewind in history and say the abolitionists just had a great event and talked about how evil slavery is, and then you said, oh, yeah, but the local slave owners association, they were really critical of it. What do you expect them to be? So, of course, the media is going to bash it. And in fact, the more accurate it is, and the more people can go, that's kind of what I believe, the more the people who, have loyalty to basically the political parasites are going to have to bash it and mischaracterize it. And I've seen some just ridiculous things, and I don't want to do any spoilers because only one episode is out, but some of the reviews make it sound like, and then it just turned into utter chaos and death and mayhem and everywhere. And I was like, I went to all the Acapulcos. When did that happen? I must have missed that part.
Yeah.
So it's just ridiculous to watch. But the thing is, the series is still the series, and it speaks for itself. And I highly recommend everybody watch it. And you don't have to like everybody in it, and you don't have to agree with anybody. Like, when is that a requirement when you watch anything? But I think it's a fascinating story, and it's a cool way to actually learn about a very serious, important idea. If you ask me, the most important idea in the world that the vast majority of people never hear about at all. They just hear different flavors of, how much should we worship a bunch of politicians?
Yeah, so I wanted this stream. This stream is for you guys, the people that watched the HBO special, The Anarchists, and saw this channel reference multiple times, and are over here to find out what the hell this whole thing is about. And I want to kind of talk to you people, and I want to tell the world and you what anarcho-capitalism is actually about. And that's why I invited one of the most awesome people I know, Larken, on the show to help me do it. I also want to give some perspective, kind of like what Larken was just talking about with the event, and Acapulco and Anarcho-Capitalism, the event, and the people that are moving there to try and live more free. I want to give perspective and talk about how that's just, well, I guess I'll get into that. This is a good way to start off, right? Like the people moving to Acapulco, attempting to find a place in the world where they can live more free. That's awesome and good for them. And, I hope it works out. And there's a lot of other groups around the world doing all kinds of other stuff as well. I think there's a tendency for normal people when they see a documentary like this and they see them telling a dramatic story with bad guys and in this case up to and including murder and things like that, they're going to have a tendency to like think that is a representational thing for all of them. Like there are hundreds of thousands of anarcho-capitalists. Would you agree with that estimate in the world, Larken?
Yeah.
And go ahead. Yeah.
Now, absolutely.
And And they come in all types. And I'm not in any way trying to belittle or anything that's happened in Acapulco. In fact, I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to say that that was one group of people, actually a small fraction of one group of people in one location, trying to live free. There are people all over the world. You have New Hampshire, which is arguably one of the most successful areas in the world, in the United States, trying to make freedom ring, so to speak, when it comes to anarcho-capitalism. You have other groups all over the country. Then you have all types of people. You've got the crunchy types that are, into holistic medicine, and you have the collegiate types that people like the Mises Institute. This is a think tank of collegiate or scholastic types that are working on things like the economics of liberty. You have philosophers that are trying to put together moral philosophies that eliminate the coercion of things like the state. You have activists, you have charity workers, you have charity organizations like the one I started called Voluntary Virtue, where we try and help people in need without making the government point guns at people to extract resources to do it, against their consent. You have school teachers, entrepreneurs, you have a lot of IT people, information tech people. They're all over the world. They're in all walks of life. And I just wanted to kind of back up and make sure that that the people got the right scope on this. Like, the drama story that they're telling is to get eyeballs, but it is one story, a tragic story that happened in one place, and it is not representational of the whole of anarcho-capitalists.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a tendency, and and for years I hate it when people refer to it as a movement. That's just sort of a pet peeve of mine, because, you can sort of call it that. It's a bunch of people, all adopting a similar viewpoint on a particular thing. But that sort of brings to mind some sort of cult where this big group of people, they all bow to one person, and they all believe this set of writings, and they all dress the same way, and they talk the same way, and they use the same. And actual anarchism or voluntarism is literally just people figuring out that one thing in particular is really stupid. And what they believe about literally everything else is independent of that. Their priorities, their values, their preferences, their lifestyles, everything else. It's literally a bunch of people who figured out that government isn't legitimate, that it's not okay to rob people and boss them around, that it's not okay to use force against people who didn't harm or threaten anybody. And they just figured out that. So to me, in the long run, I think it's going to be just as silly as people using a label to mean I'm someone who doesn't believe in Santa Claus. Oh, you're one of those non-Santa Clausists? It's like, well, yeah, but I don't identify as that, because that's just one stupid thing I don't believe in. There's 80 million things that my life is actually about that I like to do. And music, as you might be able to tell from the studio behind me, 1,000 people can be into 1,000 different things. The thing that makes this that makes this a community or whatever movement or whatever you want to call it is just that everybody in it figured out in one way or another, and a lot of people had different paths getting there, that government is the enemy of humanity. There's that one big, horrible, violent, parasitic, destructive monster, and we figured out that thing isn't good. That thing isn't ever good. It can't be good. That shouldn't exist. What's for dinner? Everything else about our lives is still individual. It isn't like, here's a set of complex teachings that we all bow to. It's sort of an obvious revelation that we've all come to and go, oh yeah, that can't be okay. Having a ruling class can't ever be legitimate. And that's all. That's the entire freaking philosophy.
And most of the people, while certainly tending to be more on the damage side, just because it's the people that are harmed by the state that are the first to wake up and realize, wait, where do they get the right to do these terrible things to me? And then they go looking and realize that they have no right. It's only because those people are the ones that are receiving the tip of that spear. They realize it first, but it's very normal, everyday people. like I was saying, entrepreneurs, collegiate types, philosophers, like normal everyday activists, normal people, like the vast majority of them just, go to work and live their life and raise their family. It is a world-changing thing, though. It kind of changes how you go about every day of your life, because everything around you is controlled and manipulated to some extent by the government. And so when you realize that it has no just authority, it really changes how you interrelate with the world around you. And maybe we can talk about some of that, but just maybe we back up and just do kind of a quick definition of terms for the people that are new here and are just stopping by. Because there's a couple things, and it was cool. I hadn't seen this documentary before it aired. I saw it at the same time as everybody else. But I was so happy to see in the very beginning, they marked a difference between the commies, the so-called anarchists, anarcho-communists, Antifa types out on the street throwing Molotov cocktails, destroying people's businesses and property and livelihood. They marked a difference between that mess and anarcho-capitalists and what the people were trying to do in Acapulco. And so maybe, why don't we just begin there? Like, let's define anarchism.
Sure. And I actually just did a video on it that can get more in depth if people want to go to my YouTube channel called Real Anarchists, because it talks about how there are anarcho-communists who, a bunch of them are all bitter now because, like, you can't call yourselves anarchists because we were the originals. And first of all, there isn't an original anything. Anarchy literally means rule by no one. That's literally what the word means. And so an anarchist is somebody who advocates that there not be a ruling class. And that's all. It's a pretty simple concept. The anarcho-communists like to just tack on all sorts of random things like, and there can't be money or property or hierarchy or like just some random array of arbitrary garbage that they got from Marx or something. And they decide, well, we're going to jam that all into the definition of anarchism. It's like,
and force it on people.
And force it on people.
Which is the contradiction in terms. Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the ridiculous thing. Because whenever somebody identifies as an anarcho-communist or anarcho-socialist, my first question, sometimes my only question is, okay, if you choose to interact with people by having a commune and sharing everything and having nobody in charge of anything, first of all, I'm not going to mess with you if you do that. If other people want to do things differently, like they want to use mediums of exchange and they want voluntary hierarchies and they want trade and they want things like that, are you going to leave them alone? In other words, is this communist thing just a thing you're choosing for yourself and like maybe you'd recommend other people do it, but you're not going to force it on others? Every once in a while, one will say, oh, yeah, that's just what I would do. And if you want to do the capitalist thing, go do it. And I'd say, OK, cool. We can get along fine. Even voluntarily, I don't think your ideas are going to work very well. But I'm not going to be there to like mess them up for you. You can mess them up on your own.
You can form your own bread lines. You don't need my help.
Right. I'm not going to make you get into bread lines. But the majority of supposed anarcho-communists I've talked to, they hardly ever come out and say, I'm going to force it on you. But they don't say no. They say, well, there needs to be like maybe a central committee that makes sure that everybody it immediately occurs to me, do they not notice that they're describing a government? They're describing a centralized authoritarian monster that wants to force their preferences on everybody. Why are you pretending to be anarchists when you want a central committee? And if you look at the constitutions in the history of the Soviet Union and communist China and North Korea and other places, they used all the same terminology. We're going to have the People's Committee that's for fairness and equality and yada, yada, yada. And my first and main question is, well, are you going to force that on people or just suggest that they do it? Because if you're going to force it on people, A, you're not moral, and B, you're not an anarchist. And if you're not going to force it on people, okay, you can go do ideas that I think are dumb. And that's the beauty of anarchism. It isn't one person saying, here are the ideas everyone must follow. You can do whatever you want if violent, and 1,000 people or 1,000 groups of people can try 1,000 different ways to organize and arrange things and see what works, instead of having one group of control freaks saying, no, we must all do it this way. So anarcho-capitalism says you do whatever you want if you're not messing with other people and their property. And anarcho-communists basically say, no, everybody has to be within this weird, bizarre, convoluted economic theory that doesn't actually make any sense anyway. Like, we can't even say what it is, but we're going to force it on all of you.
Yeah, there's one rule. Like, it's not a super complicated like ideology, if you can even call it that. It's that no one has the right to control you absent your consent. And if you consent, then it's not really control. You're just going along with your agreements that you have voluntarily made. That's it. And anybody that tries to complicate it and make it more difficult than that is going off on tangents. Now, there is the thing, though, that they got to the word first. And just imagine, just imagine, like, if you're not an anarchist and you're watching this, just imagine, put yourself in our shoes for a moment and realize that we have come to an ideology whose name is anarchism, anarchy. We want no one to non-consensually control us. But unfortunately, a bunch of these commies got there first, and everybody, like, to the point where the average person associates anarchy with, like, mayhem and Molotov chaos in the streets. Like, they have done that to the word, and the word is the most beautiful thing almost of any of the words. No rulers. The absence of non-consensual control over you. What an amazing, beautiful, precious concept that is. And for it to have been perverted into what everyone thinks it is today is just a travesty. So I'm glad that we took a moment to just like call out once again that difference. So,
and
go ahead.
If I could just throw in the weird dogma that you get with communism of like, well, there's no property ownership. Well, there might be personal property, but not private property. It's this big convoluted mess of garbage that you have to like memorize and agree with to be on their side. Whereas actual like voluntarism, actual anarchy, if you just talk normal people through it, they agree with most of it to begin with. Like if you ask people, like, what would you think about the idea of like government, instead of just stealing a bunch of money and spending it on whatever the heck they want, what if you were allowed to decide which things you were going to fund? And maybe you say, I don't like anything they do with my money. I'm not giving them anything. And you'd be allowed to do that. Would you be okay with that? And everybody says, yeah, that would be nice. Like if there's like a library or roads or something that I want to chip in for, and I want someone to do that. Yeah, but I'm not too fond of paying for this. And, there's different people want different things. But what they don't realize is, well, you just described anarchy, literally, because if you get to decide who you give your money to get services, whether it's fixing a road or even like protection or, private security or whatever, that's not government anymore. Government by definition doesn't ask what you want. It takes your money and spends it however it wants, and it bosses you around and it controls your behavior and it makes you do stuff. So when people are actually brought to it without this huge bias of, oh, is that like every man for himself and like violence in the streets? And no, it's literally like nobody gets to rule you. And otherwise we just live our lives and we can cooperate and organize in a million different ways. And when people are brought to it with an understanding of what's actually being suggested, what's being changed and what isn't being changed in the world that like you and I want to see, most people are like, oh, okay. And it's unfamiliar enough that often people have questions of, well, how would this work and how would this work? Which is fine. But it's not this big, weird list of cult beliefs like the communists have that don't match reality, doesn't match our experience, doesn't match how economics works, doesn't match anything. You have to believe all this weird garbage from Karl Marx to be on our club. No, to be in our club, you have to like not initiate violence against. It's a pretty open club. That's the only requirement. You can believe in whatever else you want, just don't do that.
Yeah. And so, okay. And so here's where we come to anarcho-capitalism. And you just mentioned another term, voluntarism, in there that we should probably also kind of talk about all these things together to clarify all the names. It's kind of sucks that anarchism has been, like I just said, has been turned into this scary, chaos in the streets word. And so we've kind of had to find other terms so we can tell people what we believe without triggering all those pent up stupid biases that they've been trained with, and in some cases rightfully trained with, because like there's people calling themselves anarchists rioting in the streets and destroying people's property. Other name, we have to come up with something else to call ourselves. And so there's several that have come up, right? First of all, this idea of anarchism, of no rulers, of you own yourself, you have the sovereign right to control yourself unless you give consent to somebody else and work in agreement with them. That's it. This is the core fundamental principle behind libertarianism, for example. A consistent libertarian will be the same thing as an anarcho-capitalist. Will be the same thing. There's another term called voluntarist. Now we're just adding all the syllables we have to add to differentiate ourselves, but to also communicate the idea. Voluntaryist. We want everything in your life to be voluntary. So all these terms stand for and mean the same thing, the core principle. You own yourself. You have the sovereign right to control yourself, and no one should rule over you. Are there any other terms out there? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to point out, so we already have the problem of anarchy being, most people assuming chaos and mayhem and like it literally means no rulers. We also have a separate term, a separate problem with the term capitalism.
Yes.
Because so many people, particularly the political left, describes corporofascism as capitalism. And that's not what the word means. The word literally means ownership and trade without government interference. Nothing like what we have now. We do not have capitalism now in the US, nothing remotely close, but that gets labeled as capitalism. And then people go, well, I don't like that. Well, yeah, I don't like it either. Like actual anarcho-capitalists don't like it because that's big businesses using the violence of government, whether it's just to steal, territory and resources outright, or to squash their competition, or to have all these regulations that makes it impossible for this company to compete with that, or limits what people can do. And that isn't capitalism at all. But once again, a word has been completely butchered to the point that and I admit I don't usually use the term anarcho-capitalist, even though I am one. Just because of the baggage of having to explain what capitalist means. And what it literally means is you own the fruits of your labor. It kind of just boils down to that. If you create something, if you work for something, if you trade your labor for money and somebody else pays you, you own a thing. Like you get paid and you can buy a thing and you can trade and then you own that other thing. And you can own a car and you can own a house and you can own a whole business and you can arrange things and get evil rich without actually being evil. You can just be rich and be good because you got there by way of voluntary exchange. But these days, again, the political left so much paints a picture where if you're successful, you're automatically evil. You must have exploited and harmed other people. Where if you got rich by way of voluntary trade, you had to create something that all those people voluntarily wanted to buy, which means they're all there with the thing going, yeah, this is what I wanted to buy. Now I have one. And somewhere there can be a guy who has millions of dollars for selling them. He's not some evil villain for having provided things that people wanted to buy. That's a good thing. Like he was a positive, an overall benefit to society. But now you get this thing that, the rich are automatically evil. No. Some of them are because they use the violence of the state. And that's what so many people think of as capitalism. And it's because government has its tentacles in everything, pointing at today's system and thinking that's capitalism. Well, no wonder people hate it. I hate it too. It's just not what capitalism actually means. So there's another term that we have to fight over. And that's one of the reasons I like the term voluntarist, just because I don't have to fight over what capitalism means. But I am an anarcho-capitalist. It's just I'm slightly annoyed by having to give a half-hour explanation every time of, no, that corporo-fascism is not what I'm in favor of. It's not what any anarcho-capitalist is in favor of.
Yeah, so like if I am in the mood to fight over words, I would declare myself an anarchist, because all these other words mean the same thing. And anybody that disagrees with these other words, probably not a consistent anarchist. When I'm not in the mood to fight over words, I go with voluntarist, because it's a new word and people respond with curiosity rather than preconceived notions of Molotovs in the streets. So maybe we can just touch on that one more time. Why are groups of people like Antifa out there in the streets destroying things not anarchists?
Well, it's funny because sometimes they just openly show their hand. Like often they'll say, we need more welfare benefits and more government handouts. And wait, what? You want government to have more power and give more stuff away while pretending you're an anarchist? Like an anarchist wants government to not exist. And that's all. Like that's what being an anarchist means. On top of that, even if they don't want a ruling class, like, so maybe technically they're anarchists. If you're running around breaking people's stuff and burning down their shops because you're mad at some other person who had nothing to do with them anyway, you're a vandalous, immoral jackass. And you're definitely not a voluntarist, because to violate somebody else's property or, person is the thing you're not allowed to do. Be a voluntarist, because that's not voluntary. And so, and most of the time, what they're demanding, when you can even tell what they're demanding other than just breaking stuff, has more to do with, we want government to do more of this and that and the other thing, instead of just like, we want government to not exist. And sometimes they're completely blatant in their message, and they demonstrate they're all the way communists. They just want a different flavor of authoritarian collectivism than what we have now. And unfortunately, history will show you lots of victims of authoritarian injustice would love the chance to be the next authoritarian power that victimizes someone else. Like, being a victim doesn't mean you're virtuous, it just means you're unlucky. Being virtuous means I don't want to be victimized and I don't want anyone else to be victimized. And that is being a voluntarist. Wanting the government to, no, give us more free stuff instead of giving corporations free stuff. Now you're just bickering over stolen loot. That's not a principle. That's not anarchist. That's not moral. It's not voluntarism. It's not anything. You're just a whiny brat who wants some free stolen loot and trying to pretend that's a philosophy. So
yeah,
maybe a little harsh.
Just to restate, it's not a consistent philosophy. We can say that. There's plenty of inconsistent ones. Just to put like a summary of it. So when the government points a gun at you and says, give me your tax money or else we'll cage you, and if you resist, we'll murder you, they are being your ruler by controlling you against your consent, or by threatening you or harming you or even abducting you, your person property, and throwing it in a cage. They are ruling you and your property. The same thing on the street with one of these commies. If they surround your car and prevent you from leaving, they are effectively jailing you. If they destroy your house or your business or your property in one of their riots, they are de facto attempting to be your ruler in those situations when it comes to that property, which is an antithesis of their stated name. So there is no more clearer example than just pointing to those actions where they are making themselves other people's rulers and also trying to tell you that they want no rulers. It's obvious nonsense. Right. And another thing I wanted to talk about was what happens now is when we criticize these commies, which are clearly left-leaning, they say, okay, well, you're just the right flavor of their left anarchism. And I want to say again, no, it's not a left and right thing. There is one thing. It's really simple. It goes back to what we said a minute ago. It's not complicated. It's not left, right, up, down, sideways. It's not a spectrum. It's an on or off switch. It's so simple. Anarchism, no rulers.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
And I actually know it's interesting because, I was raised sort of, conservative and libertarian leaning and constitutionalist and yada, yada, yada. That was the flavor of statism that I grew up with. I now know thousands of anarchists who came from that side and that general culture and stuff, and they still have a lot of their same values and their priorities. They just no longer advocate that government use violence against people. And I know thousands of people who used to be socialists or Democrats, and it can be the hippies who want to garden and whatever, live however they want, and they still have the same values and they still have a lot of the same preferences and lifestyles. They just figured out, I don't want government initiating violence either. So it's not like, well, you have to give up who you are and become a part of this cult. It's literally, you can be exactly who you are. Just please stop cheering for violent aggression. And that's all. That's the only thing we ask that you change. You can, and I get along fine with people I would have been arch enemies with back when we were both statists. Leftist statists and rightist statists sit there and scream at each other. And they think, no, my ideas should be forced on everybody by way of government. No, my ideas should be forced on everybody by way of government. And they don't realize that the existence of politics is the only reason they can't peacefully coexist. Because otherwise it's just, you live your life the way you want, you support the causes you want, and I'll live my life the way I want, and we have no reason to be at war. So people have this weird notion, because they were indoctrinated into it, that, well, we need a government because it helps us get along. It literally does the exact opposite. It pits us against each other and creates conflict where there doesn't need to be conflict. I run my life, you run your life. If neither of us uses violence against each other, where's the problem? Even if we don't like each other, we can like each other, we can dislike each other, who cares? We just refrain from violence against each other, and then it's fine. And then government comes along and says, no, vote for me, and I'll take all your preferences, all your interests, all the things that you care about, and force everybody else to pay for it. And then they go to the other people and say the same thing. And then the left and right are screaming at each other. And it's so ingrained in people's thoughts that when you criticize the political parasites that they're cheering for, they assume you must be cheering for the other political parasites.
Yep.
So the left constantly thinks, oh, you're a Trump supporter. You have way more in common with Trump supporters than I do. And then the Republicans are, oh, you're bashing our guy. You must be a liberal. No, you have way more in common with the liberals than I do, because both of you have accepted the notion that we need a big ruling class that robs everybody and controls them and tries to make them all behave within similar guidelines. I want all of both of you to be free. So, you two are pretty much on the same side. You're just bickering about the details of the authoritarian violence. I don't want any authoritarian violence.
Yeah, every 4 years, I magically somehow switch sides in everybody in the general public's mind. It's like when Trump was in office and I was criticizing the ways the government was violently controlling people. They'd be like, oh, you friggin' libtard, blah, blah, blah. And then now magically Biden gets in office and I criticize him and they're all like, oh, you magatard, blah. It's like, y'all are all stuck in this stupid game and you don't even know. One side wants to steal from the other to fund war, and the other side wants to steal from their neighbors to fund welfare or whatever. It's and we're over here stop stealing, stop it. Can't we just?
We're the extremists.
We're
extremists. We're saying, how about not stealing? Oh, what's wrong with you?
People are like, oh, your ideology is it's extreme and insane and utopian, and I'm like, wait. We just want you to not steal from people. Is that so hard? Is that so complicated? Oh man. Okay. So
and the only reason that ridiculous spectacle happens is because people have been trained into this their entire lives. And one thing that occurred to me when you were talking before is a lot of people, when you say government is a ruling class, they'll say, no, we vote for it and we have a constitution, there are elections, and there are all these weird rituals that happen. And that means we're in charge. And a thing that Americans really don't like it when I point this out to them. I mean, the flag waving nationalistic type, is that democracy was the most brilliant trick that tyrants ever came up with. Because if a tyrant comes along and says, I'm going to rule you because I can, do what I say or I stomp on you, people say, we don't like you, we're going to resist. But if tyrant comes along and says, I'm going to let you choose between these two people who will boss you around and take your stuff, and that means you're in charge, you're making the choice, and that means that you consent to whatever happens afterwards. So you just have to pick one. Pick one of these. And even when the spectacle is Hillary versus Trump, and then Trump versus Biden, people are still playing that. Like, doesn't it occur to people, how could these be the choices? But for Americans who think that, well, they're not a ruling class because we can vote for them. First of all, sit down, take a deep breath before you do what I'm about to suggest, because it's going to be traumatic. Look up the constitutions of the Soviet Union and Red China and North Korea. Yes, they have constitutions. Yeah, they're all allowed to vote. They're all constitutional republics, just like the U.S. They allow their people to vote, just like the U.S. They have an individual Bill of Rights, just like the U.S. The worst tyrannies in the history of the world were democratically elected constitutional republics with a Bill of Rights. All of those. And the Weimar Republic, which became Nazi Germany. Same thing. Look up those constitutions. You've been taught that the Constitution means we're really in charge and it's a servant government and blah, 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 blah. They taught the same garbage to the Russians before stomping on them. They taught the same garbage to the Chinese before stomping on them. Taught the same garbage to the Germans before stomping on them. It's the same lie. And it's so effective because if you can get people tricked into thinking they agreed to it somehow you agreed to this. Well, I mean, this is how our system works, and we have a constitution, we have elections, and you're allowed to vote and stuff. Therefore, you have to put up with whatever happens after that. And your only recourse is to whine about it for 4 years and then try again, and then whine about it for another 4 years and then try again, and then whine about it for another till you're dead, and then your children can whine about it for another 4 years, and so on and so forth. Or you can say, we didn't consent to any of this. We didn't agree to this system. This wasn't our idea. Nobody has the right to rule us. And as Patrick and I can tell you, it's sort of a weird process your brain goes through when you realize how utterly insane the normal belief system is. Because when you escape it and look back on it, you're like, why did I ever think that these weird rituals and documents actually gave other human beings the right to boss me around and cage me if I disobey and steal my money for things I don't like? Why did I ever think that was okay? And it's literally just indoctrination. So to me, the funniest thing is if people think of anarchism as a cult, when it's literally the description of the people who got out of the cult. Statism is the cult. And we're the ones who figured out something's wrong. And so to view us as the cult, when we're the cult of run your own life and don't hurt other people. Ooh, that's so crazy.
We're the cult of consent and self-ownership. It's so insane. Like that's all. You have the ability to withdraw your consent to be controlled at any time, individually, without having to leave this plantation to go for another. You own yourself. Everything in your life needs to be voluntary. Okay, so without running too long, because we can definitely do more of these. I haven't seen the rest of the documentary. I don't think you have either. It's not out yet. I think we're going to see it at the same time as you guys do. We can do more of these shows after each episode drops if there's other cool stuff to talk about. If you're finding this channel after watching the documentary and you have questions or challenges or thoughts, leave them in the comments, and the next time we do one of these shows, we'll get to your comments and we'll talk about them. So why don't we leave it here like this? Larken, I'll hand it to you first. If you could, let's do like here's some other resources for you to learn more. What types of things should people go looking for? And then finally, like, where can they find more of your work, Larken? And then I'll do kind of the same thing with my recommendations.
There's so much stuff out there for people who want to learn more about it. The first steps are usually the weirdest for somebody, because starting to question something that almost everybody around you has religiously believed your whole life, including you, is awkward and uncomfortable, even if it's something pretty simple and obvious. I have my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, as the thing, if you really want a thorough understanding of it. But if you're just getting into it, I mean, there's the Disenthrall channel, there's Anarchast, there's my channel on YouTube. There's a gazillion videos about like everything you could think of. Whoa, what about this? And what about that? And what about the other thing?
You just stole all of the ones I was going to say.
I saved you the trouble. What I would suggest, in between reading whatever you read, looking up whatever you look up, take a deep breath and pause and dare to distinguish in your own head the difference between the parts that are really you, what you really believe in. Because I'm assuming, without even knowing you, that most of the people we're talking to, you really believe in peaceful coexistence. You don't want your neighbors attacking you. You don't want to attack them. You want to get along, right? Doesn't mean everybody's gonna. Some people might be nasty. But when you're reading about voluntarism and learning about these things, beware of the things that are not you. They were things you were taught to believe. You were taught to accept them on faith and repeat them religiously. And then there's the real you. And here's the weird part. Like, we're not trying to be your new rulers. We want you to rule yourself, which sounds a little bit schizophrenic. We want you to run your own life. I'll put it that way. We want that without even knowing you. So look into you and see which parts of this belief system are really you. What you really instinctively understand is how people should be, and which part is just stuff you were taught along the way about democracy and law enforcement and crime and authority and all sorts of stuff. And be ready for the uncomfortable process of letting go of things that were never you. They were just crap you were taught. I don't know you, and I trust the real you way more than I trust the status crap you were taught. So be ready for the uncomfortable process of letting go of stuff that isn't really you. It's just garbage that you were taught along the way. And so was I, and so was Patrick, and we were all taught the same garbage. To be who you really are, because that's what this crazy cult wants, is for you to be who you really are and be in charge of your own life. I know that's extreme and dangerous, but
it's a cult,
that's
man.
what it is.
It's a cult. Yeah, so I'll try not to repeat too many of the things you just said, but I swear you said so much that I was about to say. I was going to go on a rant about the word "we" as like this. Start as a statist Patrick, as a normal statist. A statist is just somebody that thinks the government should exist and control people, right? So most normal people are statists. That's an insult if, you know, once you realize it is. But until then, it's just a description of everyone that's alive except for anarchists. You'll hear this word, and as soon as you start paying attention, it's like when you start shopping for a new car and you have your eye on one. It's like, oh, I really like those, I don't know, Jeep Wranglers. As soon as you start thinking about buying a Jeep Wrangler, suddenly you see them all around you, everywhere on the road. Like there's 1,000 Jeep Wranglers now, just because you're paying attention. Start paying attention to the word "we" and how people use the word "we" just in everyday discourse, and how they are almost never actually part of the group of people in that "we." So they'll say, "We're in the Middle East." No, you're not. You're never in the Middle East. Or they'll say, you know, we're funding the war in Iraq, let's say. No, you're being stolen from, and some other people are funding the war in Iraq. Or the point is to start thinking of yourself in terms of an individual, and start thinking and speaking of yourselves in terms of an individual instead of the collective. And I'm really speaking to the people on the right now. That was my background too, so I can kind of speak their language. Anytime you use that "we," anytime you wave that flag, you are collectivizing yourself into a group of people. And the group of people that you're collectivizing yourself into is doing a lot of stuff that you probably don't consent to. So just for a moment, look for that word we. And like Larken was saying, do you really want to be a part of it each time you hear that word we used? Because other people will use it at you. They'll be like, well, we need to help the poor. Like, hold on. I help the poor in my own way. We have an event that we do every year here in Dallas where we go and help the homeless people. That's a we that I'm a part of, a small group of people that actually do something effective. I'm not in favor of a large, massive, forced, non-consensual, throw you in a cage if you don't want to, pay your taxes or whatever to pay for it. A thing that is welfare. Anyway, so that was kind of my tip that folded into what Larken was saying. Resources. Lysander Spooner wrote a book. Lysander, Lysander. Lysander Spooner, No Treason, The Constitution of No Authority. You have to read this book. It was written around the time of the Civil War, as slavery was coming to an end. This was an abolitionist, somebody fighting to end slavery, wrote an amazing book. He was a lawyer. He was the first person to try to compete with the United States Postal Service, and he did so well that they made a law to make it illegal to compete with them and shut him down. He is a badass baller. It's not a long book. And if you want the audiobook, I read the entire thing on my channel, Disenthrall, which is where I'll also send you guys if you want the more philosophical side or the more activist side of things. Disenthrall, DISENTHRALL.me is our website. You can find all of our platforms there. Larken has therosechannel.com, where he has a lot of good resources there. What was your other website? You have a new one, right?
Well, there's the Candles in the Dark one, which is Attend Candles, but that's mostly for people who are already voluntarists.
That's true. Okay. And then if you want to find out more about the charity work that we do, voluntaryvirtue.org is the website for that. And then finally, for the people that really need to hear it in words that they're used to hearing since birth, I would recommend that everybody read the Declaration of Individual Independence. Larken actually helped us do a reading of that in a video a while back. You can find the text version at notgovernor.com. There's a button at the top. You can go straight to the document of it. But what it is it's the Declaration of Independence, but with the collectivism removed. And it talks and it speaks in terms of you, the individual, and your individual consent to be free. It's a very powerful document. If you want the video version, it's here on this channel, Declaration of Individual Independence. You can find that. So those are my recommendations. Larken, I guess if you're interested, we'll have you back if we need to do another one of these shows after the next episode releases. Who knows what's going to happen?
Absolutely.
It's going to be exciting.
I'm dying to see the next episode. I don't know what's on it. I know the people who made it, but I haven't seen any more than you have, so it'll be fun.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching. Hey, if you're watching this and you are already an anarchist and you see anybody discussing the Anarchists HBO special, link them this video so that we can they're going to get the drama from that documentary, bring them here, and maybe they'll get some explanations of what's actually going on behind the ideology of the cult of consent. Oh yeah, Dangerous Superstition. By the way, that book, oh man, the audiobook on Audible. Ooh, the voice performance. Oh.
I recognize that voice.
All right, enough self-promotion. Thanks everybody for watching. Thanks, Larken, for joining me. Any last words?
Thank you. Nope. That's about it for now.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.